Welcome to the Focus Professional Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Lenton, and this is episode 25. Welcome to the Focus Professional Podcast. Today's guest is a fellow with a BIPP, a fellow with the SWPP, and a winner of far too many awards and titles to mention in a podcast only an hour or so long. So, as I would quite like to talk to her, I'll leave that little bit out. It's Jessica McGovern. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for having me. This is so exciting.
Great to be able to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
I'm super pumped to be here. We have said off record that Joe's going to have to just wind me in a little bit because sometimes I can be slightly chaotic. So let's just hope that this is going to be good and a good lesson for everybody, and hopefully show some interesting things.
Yeah, I'm sure I can edit my snoring out later. So how are you getting on settling into your not so new home now, I suppose, but there's still plenty of renovations going. How is it going up there?
Oh my goodness, the farm. Yes, we've been here for just over a year now, so it's not so new anymore. It still feels somewhat new, just because I don't know if anybody will have ever done anything like it before, but if you have land on site and also fairly tricky land as we do, it takes a few seasons to actually understand how that land responds and how it reacts to things like water, to things like frozen temperatures, to things like drought conditions. And so it's actually been a really good study period over the year of exactly what we need to do and where we should put things that we're planning in the future. So there was kind of one area where I was like, this would be perfect for that thing. And then actually having lived here, you couldn't have picked a worse place to put that specific thing because it either floods in winter or when, the big storms come, it's exceptionally exposed in that position. So there's actually a lot of learning and studying of the land and how it reacts to things and how, what time are we going to get the grass through? Is my field of horses able to cope with that many horses? Because when you start, you're just kind of guessing. So it's really good to have had that year to understand how where we live works, and it's all things you would never normally need to know, but we need to know that information. So a few things, like I would make the winter turnout for the horses slightly larger because it didn't quite cope for the period of winter that we would have them on there. So those things you only learn when you're doing.
It was similar for us, really, when we moved into our house, because people said to us, don't touch the garden for a year. And partly for the first year, you could hardly see half of it because it was covered in so many weeds. But, it does make sense because you need to get a feel for where you're going to put things. You need to know where stuff is already growing, but happens to be underground at that time of year. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense to observe it first before you start putting things in.
And even just a case of like the winter dieback here is quite extreme. So in summer, an area can look absolutely awful with overgrown weeds, brambles, nettles, things like that. And for us, we work on a genuine process of priority. So the site's never going to look pretty until it's more finished because we just prioritize with the time that we have. And so some areas look genuinely awful. Like I'm embarrassed when somebody comes around and there's that area that's just awful. But then with the winter dieback, it dies back off very quickly and to ground level, so you can see everything that actually was there. So it's a consistent process of tidying up in a way. Like in the field, I've had horses turned out in a field that we didn't know had a buried metal gate. And the only way that gate has come out is basically with the winter dieback, with grazing down, and then with ground movement from having tractors and quads and stuff on the land. So, yeah, that's outside. I mean, the inside, I wouldn't say that this is for everyone. That's probably the main thing. It's you live in a constant state here of camping. So for those who don't know, there's a very large old farmhouse which is very dilapidated and had parts of the roof missing when we arrived on site. So that's actually what I'm sat in right now. So I'm in the kitchen of the main farmhouse, which obviously now has a roof. And then
that's good. I'm glad you're not sitting out in the open. Yeah,
it's a positive. And then there is also another dwelling on the site just down the hill, which is the cottage, and that's where we sort of set up camp at first, but we have a very complex deal with the seller, so we could be bankrupt this time next year, and that's a very real possibility that we live with all of the time. So we have 2 years from the date of entry to be able to mortgage the property, and if we cannot get finance in any way, then the seller has a full right to repossession, and we would lose all of the money that obviously we've also ploughed in to the renovations. So it's a very, very, very high stress situation, and every single day something crops up that you didn't plan for. So it's basically full-time project management around our work. And then Dan, my husband, he does pretty much all of the doing outside of kind of, specialist trades. So he's taught himself to plaster. He went on a 3-day plastering course and then has been practicing, because that would be one of the biggest expenses with the...
Oh, yeah.
I think we have a total of something like 28 rooms to do. And the rooms are, in case of this house that I'm in at the moment, absolutely huge. So something like plastering would eat a considerable portion of any budget that exists. So it's Dan's having to sort of learn on the fly. He had just basic DIY skills beforehand, and now he's been, block laying to build walls and sheds and things, and also doing the plastering. He'll do all of the decorating. So it's a massive undertaking to do, and I can understand why people would think we're idiots / stupid, but also why people don't do it. A lot of people will say that we're very lucky to have what we have, and I don't discount the fact that we're incredibly fortunate, obviously, to be able to do it. But the price of this site and the renovations that we've put in so far are less than like a 3-bed or a 4-bed semi down south. So it's not financially not doable for a lot of people, who are in the 30s, 40s, 50s, for example, and have built up equity in previous houses. None of this was straight from scratch as a first-time buyer. No. But it is, you have to have a willingness to not ever stop, because that's what farming is anyway.
Yeah,
and although we don't have livestock ourselves, we do have livestock on site. So there are 115 cows here, and we have obviously the horses too, and we work with local farmers as well.
Well, a little tip with some of the wilder areas and all that we've done is just say, when it comes around to summer and an area is looking a little bit overgrown, a little bit messy or whatever, that's giving back to wildlife. That's creating alternative habitat,
We're rewilding.
Exactly. There you go.
I don't know if you could argue that we're rewilding like 3 acres. It's fairly extensive for the bits that aren't having it. But we do leave a lot for the wildlife. We've got badgers here. We've got very, very active badger sets. They love leaving us presents. Inside the shed is apparently one of their boundaries so they defecate inside the horse shed, because that's their line on the edge of their set boundary. But we've got lots of them. We've got loads and loads of red kites, loads of deer. It's a really nice place for the wildlife, to be honest, because it's mostly untouched. There's not really any intensive agriculture or anything like that. And although we're not remote, it feels very remote when you hear. It's very difficult to explain. I love it. I love it. I wouldn't do anything different, Joe. Honestly, I can complain all day about the stress and the financial sacrifice and the lack of heating and no water and all sorts of disasters that can occur. But I wouldn't change it for the world.
Minor setbacks. Yeah, minor.
Who needs a working toilet at this stage? I mean, no one, clearly.
Hole in the ground or a bucket. Yeah, there exactly. You go. Yeah. So are we going to expect to see lots of wildlife photos coming in from you now? Are you going to be sort of perching out in the fields at early hours of the morning, taking pictures of the deer?
Honestly, if I had time, I would, but there is no time. So I struggle with the patience of both landscape and wildlife photography. They both require a large amount of patience. And then they're not... For me, there is always something that I should be doing with my time anyway. So it would have to be an almost guaranteed sighting of something. I think the badgers would give you that, to be honest, because they're so active in the sets. But I don't have the time, unfortunately.
Oh, maybe others, when they come up, they'll
potentially, yeah,
get
definitely
to enjoy that. Yeah. So, I mean, when you then go down to like photography conventions in the big cities, so you go down to London and so on. I mean, that's a bit of a contrast, isn't it, really? So how do you feel about doing that? Are you always thinking, I'm looking forward to getting home, or do you quite like the contrast?
It's a really strange thing, to be fair. I've always lived fairly rural, and I always enjoyed going to larger sort of metropolitan centres because it gave me a little bit of a renewed enthusiasm to be doing things. I think the biggest one was the Society's convention in at the start of 2025 in January. That one was the biggest one where I felt it was a bit of a shock to the system because I hadn't been in a busy area for almost a year, and then to go straight into central London alone without Dan, without the dogs, because I use them as social crutches anyway. So to go in there, and it was a lot of noise and a lot of people, and that was the first time that I've noticed a bit of a, oh my goodness, this is a lot feeling in myself, because usually I wouldn't be like that. There was an element of like, oh, I wish I was home, but then at the same time I really enjoy doing what I'm doing there. So being there itself was lovely, wonderful. I wouldn't miss it for the world, honestly. It's always put in my calendar ahead of time, and other events like that. But when I got home, the quiet was extra special. So it just recenters you in the quiet, and you can only hear the wind going through the trees, and you can only hear the birds. There's no other sound. There's no one else there. Nobody can see you. Nobody can hear you. That level of just being alone, I love. Some people hate it. I know you understand that, but for me, that is very, very, very calming. So, the contrast itself, I think, is really nice. It's really nice, but it's nice to be able to also just literally, for me, it would be hop on a plane and be in London in an hour or two, because that's the easiest way for me to travel. And having
that's quicker than me from Norfolk.
level of convenience is quite nice.
Yeah. I suppose it's a little bit like what people sort of jokingly say about when friends and family visit. It can be quite nice to see them, and then it's nice to see them go.
I guess so. I do make the most of it when I am out in the wild world, because coming back here, we can't travel so much anymore. We've got responsibilities here. We've got the 4 dogs, we've got the 3 horses, and none of those are things that you can just kind of up sticks and go away from. So we travel considerably less now that we're here than we did before. We used to be flying around the world all year, and that's not the case anymore. So all of our travel is very, very well planned, and it's considered, and it's minimal. So there are months on end where I won't leave the farm. I don't even go shopping. Dan does the shopping. So I literally can be in our little plot and not leave. And the only people I actually see in real life would be neighbouring farmers or the postman. And that's it. Nothing else. And I enjoy that. Yeah, I love it. It's great.
Sounds great. Yeah. So, an ideal sort of environment then for working with animals. I mean, why do you enjoy working with animals? Given that you said you find it difficult to have the patience for landscapes and shooting wildlife and so on, a lot of people would say you need a heck of a lot of patience to try and get a cat or a dog or anything to sit still so you can get a decent photo. What is it about working with animals that you're passionate about?
I think it's very easy to work with animals if you understand them. And that's the if. It's the if part that's really important. So I don't find working with animals frustrating. I don't even really find that you have to have a lot of patience, because all we're doing is having a conversation with them and giving them options of behaviours to do. And they, in the course of a session, usually I will have trained someone's dog, if we're photographing dogs, to be a good dog. In their reference of what good is. So there's a lot of like, oh, my dog's quite naughty, is quite, difficult, is stubborn. You hear the word stubborn loads, all these words kind of coming up. And actually that's sort of I can't even say the word,
anthropomorphizing.
There we go. So putting a human feelings and emotions into a subject, but actually usually they just haven't had an open line of communication. And when you actually start listening and adjusting your behavior to the dogs, then they feel like they've got a bit of a say in what's happening. And then the same with horses too. You ask a question, and for any effort towards the answer that you wanted, they're rewarded for that. So then they're more likely to do it that way in the future. So it's just a case of positive reinforcement training during the course of a photo shoot. So it's not difficult if you can train a dog, if that makes any sense, or if you can, understand and read the body language and work with that. So it's a collaborative effort. So the usual problem is the owner. That's
right. Yeah.
The hardest part is them, because they usually have no understanding of the dog's body language. It's quite shocking when you know it all to then see how somebody would deal with their own dog, or how they would handle that dog, or how they read that dog's behavior and give it a totally different meaning than what actually is happening in front of you. So a lot of the time we see that, and that's the part where you have to have patience.
So how did you learn that then?
Oh, well, just most of it through trial and error. I spent a lot of time alone as a child and as a teen, and I enjoyed training the dogs, but it was just sort of figuring it out as we went along, and we ended up in a really good place. So the first kind of dog model I had was a Labrador called Tess, and then another rescue Labrador called Bella was the second one, and they were just our family pets. But the learnings through them was instrumental for then. Alfie would have been the next. So everybody knows Alfie, my big black and white border collie, who'll be 11 this year. He was sort of the first real, this is your job now as a photography model, which people will laugh and scoff at, but my dogs work very hard, and they will work for anybody in any environment, and that takes about 2 full years of solid training to achieve.
Right. Yeah.
So I learned a lot of my training from me doing it myself, reading lots of books about it. Take it, some of them are good, some of them are not good, and then also working with other dog trainers. I was doing agility as well as dog sports, and that helped a lot as well to just understand how we can increase that reward frequency to generate desired behavior faster. But really, all of these fancy words just mean that you make it clear what you'd like from the dog, and it's a game kind of hotter and colder. Like if you're trying to tell someone where to go and you're using, you're getting hotter.
Yeah.
Oh no, cooler. It's kind of a little bit like that, but you don't necessarily need to give what we'd call a negative marker for a bad response. So if the request was for the dog to sit, well, sit's a bit easy. If the request was for the dog to lie down, and instead of moving in a downward position, the dog sort of stood up, we wouldn't necessarily mark that with a negative. And I do with my own dogs, just so that our conversations are very quick. So if I'm handling a dog, I can handle Pip specifically at a very big distance on large rock faces and put her into exactly the perfect position I want. And all of that's through a process of her wanting to move through a location but listen to commands. So she will go out, she'll do an outrun. She's a border collie, so it's easy for her to work away, so she'll do an outrun, and then when she's getting towards a place where I'd like her to be, I can give her verbal feedback on that. If she moves away, I'll say nah. Doesn't mean anything bad, it just means not the right choice, try again. And so then she'll give me an alternative, and I'll give her positive reinforcement, and then when I want her to stop somewhere, I'll just say wait, and all 4 feet will stop exactly where they are. And then at that point, I can do micro movements with my shoulders to reposition. And all of that is through her knowing that we've got an open line of communication and we can work together. So it's a lot of teamwork. And I much prefer doing that teamwork with animals than with anybody else, hence why I do what I do.
Well, that makes perfect sense, I think. But I mean, it's one of those things where, you say that something that you do every day is easy, and partly that's because you do it every day. You've trained yourself to do these things. So anybody looking on the outside would say you've clearly got a strength for working with animals. You can build up that rapport. So when you're putting your business together, when you're thinking about what you're going to do to earn money and so on, how consciously are you working with things that are your strengths, or are you following like a kind of a preset kind of model that you've come across in books and so on, as this is how you run a business? Is it more about you and getting it to be a good fit for your skills, or is it like a theoretical exercise?
That's such a good question. Honestly, that is a really good. This could be a whole 7-hour conversation between us two. So I'm gonna try and keep this brief.
I might have to make this into part 1, 2, 3, and
12, 15. We'll release one at Christmas just to keep it spicy. No, I 110% work to my strengths, and that has always been the case. I have worked a lot on my weaker areas that needed to be strong. So that's happened over years. That's not a quick fix. But I also have been very fortunate. I guess an unfair advantage for me was that I could watch my dad do his business growing up. So he started a business. It was very, very small when I was very young. And then by the time I was in my mid-teens, it was a multinational company. And so I watched that happen from the sidelines and the dinner table conversations about how things were going, and seeing that and seeing the decision making he made. He's a very, very, very quiet person. He is absolutely not an extrovert. He doesn't mix that well with people just because he doesn't enjoy it. Like he likes the peace and quiet. And there are a lot of similarities between me and him. I am slightly better in a crowd. I'm okay with public speaking. Those things he would find very difficult. But I watched him make decisions that meant his business would be strong, whilst also making sure he worked to his strengths and enjoyed what he was doing. And a lot of that was making sure other people with those strengths did those roles. And so as soon as I was able to, I did the same. So it was no longer my job to do the bit that I know I'm not that good at, and I also dislike, and that frees up time. No, not everybody's going to have that opportunity, and that's where you have to be very honest. And I think the biggest issue with a lot of business owners is, especially small business owners, where maybe it's their first business, is that they are not able to be honest about where they sit in terms of their skills, because there is no reference. There's no compass for how good you are or not.
Do you think that then that they're not necessarily honest about it, or do you think actually that in some instances it's that worry about, well, it's a one-person business, how do I afford to bring other people in to do these things? Sometimes I wonder whether people try to cover too many bases too soon and think they've got to be on all the social media, they've got to have a website that does this, that and the other, whereas actually perhaps they need to narrow down a bit, focus down a bit, and not try and do too much.
Potentially. I think some of it is, some it depends. Everybody's different, so it's difficult to give kind of like a broad stroke and cover everybody off in one fell swoop, because we're not, I don't think, going to be able to do that. But I see a lot of hundreds of business owners and work with them, photography business owners specifically, but also other businesses that are completely unrelated, whether they've started an IT business or they've started a online subscription platform for dog training, or all of these people I've worked with fairly closely. And the ones that do well are the ones that at least acknowledge, that's not my strength. Whether they can fix it or put something in place straight away to alter the situation immediately, or later down the line, they at least are aware, do you know what, I'm not that good with numbers. And actually, I think a bookkeeper would be helpful for me in this situation to make sure I stay on track with my tax returns and so on and so forth. Or the biggest thing that I see, the biggest weakness I see in photography businesses is the marketing piece. There's an innate fear of it, and that will always lead to a unsuccessful business. It's a kind of, you have to be able to tell people who you are and what you do and why they want it. Or business is always going to be very difficult. So then it's a case of, do you outsource that part? And that's the part I would say no. By all means, outsource perhaps a little bit of it, maybe copywriting if you struggle to write. But having been the marketer for small businesses that are, sole person, sole trader enterprises, it's next to impossible for us as a marketer that's hired in to give an authentic voice to that business when there's only one person running it and they're the authentic voice. And that becomes very difficult to give marketing that customers will trust if you're just the only person. So I do think that's something that people really should work on. And at these big events, you know, like the expos that you've already mentioned, Joe, that's the kind of place where I'd be like, go to all the business classes. Shooting is not important. Genuinely, it's not. If you can take a sharp picture, it's well exposed and you know, the white balance is all right, and you've kind of done a bit of a composition, you're already well on the way to being able to charge for that work. But the business bits, that's the part that everybody needs to know more about, because that's the weakest link in everybody's businesses. Essentially, it's not the quality of the photos, and although it can be super sexy to go to the big shooting workshops and the classes, and yes, you might need to brush up on those skills, so fair enough. The biggest issue I see as a trainer at these events as well is that if I put on a business class, it's the subscription for that is very small. If I put on a urban canine portraiture class, it's fully sold out in a few days. The difference is massive, but actually one would help your business considerably more than the other one. But one is just a bit less sexy than the other one when you look at it on paper. One, you know, you're going to enjoy. The other one, you know, you're going to find it hard. So yeah, try and overcome that a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot there, isn't there? Really, I mean, with marketing, you're building a brand. It's not just having fun being a photographer. It's like when I've spoken at events like in colleges or something, and tried to get people to guess how much time does a professional photographer, what percentage of their time do you spend taking photos and that kind of thing, and they haven't got a clue. People do not have a clue. If you want to run a business, actually the photography part is quite small. You know? Tiny. Yeah. Yeah, you don't spend most of your time doing that. And if you're going to have a brand that comes across well, you don't want any dissonance in there. And if you hand stuff over to someone to do your social media, someone else to do your website or whatever, you've got potentially 2 or 3 different voices going on rather than one coherent brand voice. And people need that sort of coherence in their mind in order to purchase. Once you start breaking it down, people sense something's not quite right and are less likely to buy. At least that's what I've found.
Yeah, definitely. You're breaking the trust. So it all comes down to trust. You know, does someone trust you or do they not? And I see a huge number of websites annually. We look at websites all of the time, and I see a huge number of websites annually where there is no photograph of the photographer on the photographer's website. There's no headshot. There's no even picture of them working. There's just nothing. And there's a level of like, would I trust a small business or a sole trader that I'd never heard of? So we're going that this wasn't a referral basis.
Sure, yeah.
And I can't see them. And some of them don't say the full name of the person. Sometimes even on the homepage, there's not where they work, the area in which they, the geographic area that they work in or cover. And this is this shows to me anyway as a huge lack of understanding of the target market and their customer journey and how that buying process is done, because it isn't a case of they land on your website and they just book you. There's a level of they have to know you, they have to like you, and then they have to trust you. Otherwise, you're never going to get that conversion. So it's these tiny little things that can make a really big difference to someone's business, but it's very hard if you've never run the business before or run our business before to know those things. And that's the things that you can only get from someone who has made all of the mistakes that you're potentially making now, and then has potentially fixed them as well. And having someone who's worked with a variety of businesses or has started and maybe failed a few times at running their own businesses, those people have got the biggest pot of knowledge available because they've seen it all go wrong. And therefore they know why it went wrong, hopefully, we would hope. And therefore then they're able to hopefully tell you what you can do to get it right.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at their sort of strengths and weaknesses and thinking about our target market. So some of it is thinking about ourselves and some of it is thinking about our potential clients. And for different people, the balance can lie on more on one side or more on the other. So some people are more interested in creating a lifestyle business that they enjoy, and other people are more interested in the profit side of it. So it's much more about bending themselves around their target market. I mean, for you, where's your preference of that balance lie?
It would depend on which business we're talking about, because I have three. So it would, and the answer does differ massively. So the answer does differ for all of them. For my businesses that are based in or around photography, I don't even know if I could answer that with a straight up answer. I would say to them, to everybody who comes to me for business advice, your opinion doesn't really matter. Your target market is the most important thing, because if you make a decision on your brand colors or your whatever, your branding, and your target market generally would absolutely detest them or would be put off by them, then you need to change your target market, which is a viable option. You are allowed to do that. You're allowed to realign with a different target market. It just might mean different results. So there might be less people, therefore less bookings, or it might be that they have a lower level of disposable income, and therefore then average sales would be different, and you need to use a different business model. But you are allowed to change that. But realistically, that's a you problem. You need to get over yourself in that situation and make sure you're designing a brand that would appeal to that target market that you've identified as being the viable one with the income that you want to be able to do the business model that you'd like to do. So from that perspective, yes. From my perspective, I have built the businesses to be able to let me do what I'd like to do and what I need to do to keep me sane, because that is fairly important, and be able to manage them as well. But we will operate, especially with That Tog Spot, on a principle of asked for, therefore made. Everything is asked for, therefore made, and everybody knows that as well. So if they want something, then usually it will be made. So whether it's a 5-day retreat in Scotland that's in person, that's asked for, therefore it was always asked for before it was made. And It again, it creates that kind of like open line of communication, that sort of relationship whereby I think the students would trust me to make sure that whatever was made was what they actually wanted in the first place, and that level of trust I think is really important. But all of my guys also know that I operate on my core values, which they know because we do exercises on them, which is staunchly focused. I will never move away from them, which rely mostly on productivity, integrity, and honesty. And that is seen through everything that I do as well. So I will never go that far away from myself that those things would be sacrificed, because I know inherently I would be incredibly unhappy and unsatisfied with that. They have to rely on that. So it's a kind of a mixture of the two. But I tend to do a lot now of what I enjoy. So what I shoot is what I enjoy instead of what other people perhaps would enjoy. But for clients and for my client work, which I do. For them, it's slightly different, and I will bend a bit more to suit them a little more, but less so than I did when I was first starting and needing to fill the diary with bookings in that department. So if it was a process of growth, 100% target market focused. If it's a process where, do you know what, you're happy with where you're at, you don't need any more clients, you're not really that concerned about growth, you're wanting to either maintain or even, start to scale back, because we have done that with one of our businesses, then at that point it becomes, what do you want to do? And then that takes the lead. So I think different situations. That was a long. Joe, stop me.
No, I think that's valuable to hear. I think people need to realise that there are different ways of setting up a business. There's not just one template that works for everybody. And it also depends on your values, and it depends on what you need. So if you're in a position where you don't have enough money, you probably need to focus more on the target market side of things to get more money in. But then there comes that balance of what for you is enough. Because for some people, let's think at the end of the day, why do we earn money? We earn money so that we can enjoy the rest of everything that we do, basically. So if you've got enough that you can eat and have shelter and do what you need to do, and you don't have ambitions to be wealthy and driving fast cars and all that kind of thing, then you don't always need to keep growing. You don't always need to keep bending your will to that of other people. Because I think all too often when you read business books or you see presentations, it's all about making more money. And often some people will even say you shouldn't start a business unless you've got an exit plan for selling it.
Yeah, no, I do. It's funny because yesterday we had a live Q&A, a business one, and one of the students sort of said a similar thing. There was a query over whether they were scared to grow or just didn't want to grow the business. And I said that you need to identify which one it is. Are you scared to grow? In which case you need to address that and work out why and get to the bottom of that. But if it's that you just don't want to grow, then you don't have to. So
No.
I was pushed fairly hard when I was about 23 to scale up my marketing business that at that point was doing quite well, and then sell it. And it was a very clear, you'd be mortgage free, you could do whatever you wanted to do with that money. And I just didn't want to do it. I don't want to do it. It's not important to me. And I think you have to know what your values are in terms as well of like what your goals are. So when I was younger, if I was asked the question, what do you want to be when you're older in school? My legitimate answer was I want to be safe. That was the only thing that didn't matter about, a career or whatever it was. It was just, I just want to feel safe because I didn't at that point. So that was the most important thing for me. And I'll always remember my answer to that because now I look back and it makes me smile. But that was a very big thing for me. So it was being safe. And there's also motivators for different people. So my motivation has never been money. And some people will say that or will laugh at me for saying that and say, yeah, what a joke. But it hasn't. It never has been. I've never been the kind of, even when I had no money and I was in debt, I still didn't, check my bank account or focus on money. It just wasn't important to me. What was important to me was a feeling of being fulfilled. That's very important to me. A feeling that I'm in some way helping others, that was important to me, and moving towards my own goals or dreams or aims or whatever you want to call them. Whereas Dan, my husband, he's motivated by money. And he's not ashamed to admit that, and you shouldn't be if you are, but he is. So he would change jobs if it meant a better salary, or he would take work if it meant that it was more money, those kind of decision making, and he would build a business around income growth and scaling. Whereas for me, it would never be that. As soon as we go away from me feeling like I'm safe and feeling like I'm happy and feeling like I can, pay the bills and cover things or move towards my goal, which was my one, then at that point, I don't care for it anymore. And actually it makes me feel sad. So therefore I don't want to do it. So everybody's different again in that respect. And it's okay. Well, I think it's okay anyway. I wouldn't accept anybody saying what I do and the reasons why I do it aren't okay, because that's how I personally feel. And I'm very content with that feeling.
Yeah, I think you need quite a bit of self-knowledge, self-understanding to be able to work in the longer term like this, because it's so easy to get dragged into emulating someone that you've seen who's successful, and their values might not be the same as yours. Their source of motivation might not be the same as yours. So to align your entire business model with someone else's, it could be a huge mistake for you. So if you want it to be sustainable, whether it is to serve that desire for money or whatever else it is that motivates you, that gets you going, I think it's really important that as business owners, we do a bit of introspection, that we become aware of what matters to us, what really matters at the end of the day. Yes, we all got bills to pay and so on, but what's the core of us? So is that something that you've deliberately then spent time on, or do you feel that it's just kind of gradually been squeezed out of you by life circumstances?
I think a bit of both, to be honest. I went through an extensive period of therapy from probably when I was about 19 was probably the first deep dive. I've had therapists since I was 11. That was not my choice. But then more afterwards, and then a lot more therapy thereafter. But I think the biggest understanding for me was really trying to deep down understand why I see things in certain ways, and why things are important to me in different ways, and a knowledge and understanding of how my brain works, and how how things that make me happy, why do those things make me happy, and drilling down into the bottom of it. And I think that comes from a place of just always wanting to learn, which is me. So very much like to consistently be moving forwards and not necessarily sitting in one place.
Yeah.
So I think some of it came from a lot of work to understand that, but also a lot of acceptance as well, that it's okay to be a bit different, and it's okay to think a bit different, and it's that, and those things are okay, and that took a long time. That's far more recent, and that was somewhat squeezed out over time. But also knowing that there's a series of life circumstances where things went wrong but then came right have been very good as well. So I think sometimes a huge amount of trauma over a prolonged period of time can actually be a good thing. And I probably maybe shouldn't say that on a recorded podcast, but I do genuinely. If I hadn't have had the traumas that I've had throughout my life, and I have had many, I look very fortunate. I look like I've had a fairly good, solid, and privileged upbringing, should we say. But there's a lot underneath that a lot of people don't know. A lot of people do know it, but a lot of people don't also. And I think without those instances, there is absolutely no way I would be doing what I do now, where I am, and with the farm and all of these. There's just no way that would have happened without hitting rock bottom repeatedly. Nothing. I remember being about 24, and I said to a therapist, every time I feel like everything's going okay, the rug gets pulled out from underneath me and it all goes wrong. And when it all goes wrong, it goes really, really wrong, really bad. A huge amount of loss, a huge amount of pain, physical issues as well involved in that. And it was never a case that I could just settle. And so I think that's helped, because there is this desire in me to never settle. And therefore it constantly keeps moving we keep going forwards. And even if that means that I work 70, 80-hour weeks, which I'm actually happy to do because I enjoy what I do because of the decisions that we've already talked about, those things all become then very easy. Whereas had I not had the trauma, I probably would be much happier settling and living a normal life for my age group, because I don't live a normal life for my age group, and I never have done. When friends were going to uni and going out, having fun, I wasn't doing that. I was running with my businesses and not having a great deal of money, and I've always been that little black sheep, and I'm very happy being that little black sheep. That's where I find my happpehappiness. So I think everyone has their own path, and you just have to accept that other people will have unfair advantages over you. I've already said one of mine, which was growing up and watching my dad, was a very big unfair advantage for me. Another unfair advantage is that I speak well. That's an unfair advantage. I don't change my accent. My accent's the way it is. But it is an advantage in what I do. It's much easier for people from overseas to understand my accent than it is to understand my husband's accent, which is much stronger, kind of more from like an East Yorkshire Hull base. Yeah. So it is an unfair advantage. It's an unfair advantage that I'm English. That's an unfair advantage in some places around the world. So everybody will have them. You have them. They'll be different, and some people might have more than you, some people might have less, but you need to identify what they are and then use them properly, because they do exist. So it might be that you have an unfair advantage because you're really good with numbers. I'm not. I'm awful. I'm genuinely so bad with I like dyspraxic, or the numbery one. I don't know what it is. Dyscalculic,
yeah.
It's that one. I give me an Excel spreadsheet and I can formula my way through anything. That's fine. But if you ask me to do mental arithmetic, I'm going to really struggle. But that's why I don't do a job that needs it. And I have someone who can do those bits for me. So you have to know what your skills are and also what your weaknesses are.
Definitely. I think it's really, really important that. And it's important for people to know that, traumatic experiences are not the end of things. They can often be a very strange beginning for something else. And it's not that you go out looking for these kind of experiences. It's not that you have to suffer or something in order to reach a certain point. But I think if you're authentic to yourself, if you try to be genuinely who you are, given that we're all different in some way or another, you'll end up rubbing up against people. Something happens as a result of that. Trauma kind of is almost a corollary of being different, really. And I think that those things there can help you understand yourself better, understand the world differently, and understand what you want to do, how you want to be. And it can be painful, but you can know you're being more fully yourself. There can be that much more satisfaction in that, rather than trying to pretend to lead, the sort of 2.4 children average life that everybody does, living in a 3-bed sort of townhouse or something just on the outside of a city. We can get very formulaic about these things, and everybody thinks that's what to aim for. And you think, well, look inside yourself and think, what do you really want? I think that's quite, it's good to hear these stories from different people's backgrounds and how they work with their strengths. So, I mean, going forward now, do you still then consciously build on your strengths, or are you trying to iron out weaknesses? I mean, what sort of things do you do for your own personal development now?
I think my own personal development comes from setting very ambitious goals and then having to figure it out along the way. So it's very rarely a case of like, I'm going to learn this thing, or I'd like to necessarily be better in that. They do happen. I will give an example of one that happened recently, but mostly it's a case of, to get to where I want to be next, or to get to a point where I'm, being able to do whatever it might be. A big thing for us, and the reason why we moved to the farm in the first place, was because we really wanted to have Tuna, one of our horses, at home instead of on a livery yard. So we needed to find somewhere with land, and that wasn't an opportunity, just wasn't financially possible where we lived before. Hence why we're now in Scotland, because where we live in Scotland is a very affordable area, because nobody really wants to live here, and because the housing stock usually isn't great, as we know. Those were the reason. That was the original reason. It was we really do want to have Tuna at home, and be able to kind of wake up in the morning, look out of a window and see Tuna there. That was the driving factor of being able to find this place, and that was what we looked for. So it was in the process of having that, we want to do this thing, and it was a very firm, this is the thing we want to do, this is our goal, how do we then achieve it, that then led to everything else that we've kind of already discussed as well about the farm. But in the process, the self-development involved in that is massive. I've learned so much more in the last year about pretty much everything than I ever have done in my entire life. So I can now re-roof a shed. Those things were impossible. I now know the difference between a purlin and a truss, and I didn't know that before. And I know how to kind of pipe water. I know how to manage land a little bit better than I did before, because I knew a bit, but I didn't know enough. And I can put electric fence on a dry stone wall now. These things are things that I think are really fun and interesting, and are things that I like to learn. And I want to know, why does the immersion heater do what it does in a house? These things are things that seem so ridiculous saying out loud, but I now could leave this renovation project and go into another one and know exactly what needed to be done in a much easier way than we have had here. I've done renovations before, but never to this extent. So there's a lot of learnings have happened, and also project management and managing trades, and those things are things that are very useful regardless of what you do, because it's just managing people and managing a timeline. So those things are passing over. But there are things that I specifically will look for as an area of weakness. So identified not necessarily a weakness, but something I wanted to improve on more when I was judging at the convention. Just sitting and speaking with other judges, and also watching other judges judge and seeing if I could see the same things in the prints as they could see, those things. I was like, do you know what? I want to know more about home printing, like printing for yourself, basically.
Right, okay.
And I realized, I don't actually know that much. But I know the basic bits that I would need to know to be able to judge a print, absolutely fine. But I don't feel like I'm a master at that. I don't feel like it's, specifically a strength that I could bring to a judging team, and I want to rectify that. So I spent my time at the convention and afterwards speaking to people who I felt were experts in that, and learning as much as I could from them, and also getting advice for equipment and recommendations. And so that's something that I'm going to just work on myself over the year. That's something that I would like to do. So the things like that just come organically, I guess. In terms of my actual weaknesses, I tend to leave them where they are and focus on my strengths, because I have quite a few of them, so I can rely on them for the most part.
Yeah, I think that will make sense, really. I mean, what I'm hearing from that is that if you've got a kind of a purpose to what you're doing, if there's meaning behind where you're going, the learning process and the development process is very different. It's not like you're just thinking, oh, you feel somehow I should improve this or I should improve that. Once you've got a purpose behind what you're doing, everything is all galvanized towards that, and it really helps your motivation. I mean, yeah, we can then see other things that we might think, actually, yeah, I do just want to get a bit better at that. But if we've got a purpose in there, that really gives the mind focus and helps you to not quit on the difficult days.
And there are many difficult days. But it is. And that's the process where you learn. You have to make mistakes to learn. And I think people feel like they always have to do well. And if they do badly, then it means they should just stop and never do it again. And that's not true in almost all cases. Obviously, if there's someone's life's at stake, or you're negatively impacting somebody else, then maybe pause and have a rethink of that. But more often than not, if you make a mistake or have a failure, or something just didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to turn out in the first place, those are the bits where all you need to do is go, right, that didn't go to plan, but why didn't it go to plan? And then identify, ideally three reasons why something didn't work so well, and then prioritize just one thing to improve for the next time you do it, and then keep going until you improve the one thing, and then add the second, and then add the third. And then that process of self-critique is something I try and teach out regularly, because it's the most helpful thing. So if you're taking a picture and you're wanting to improve, and you take a picture and you just think, oh, it's rubbish, this is just it's a rubbish picture, I'm like, no, find 3 things that are good in it, 3 things that you feel like you did well, even if it was you got up early to get the sunrise. I don't care, that's fine. So 3 things you think you did well, which reframes the whole piece in your head, and then 3 things you want to improve for next time, and then focus just on one of those things, or if you're brave, all 3 of them at the same time, but allow everything else to go wrong other than those 3 things, and then start building it up, and that will see bigger progress than anything else. It's the same in business as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sort of like, sounds like a derivative of a well-known sort of positive psychology kind of exercise that, at the end of the day, you find 3 things that have gone well, or 3 things to be grateful for. That kind of setting your mindset in a positive direction, because it's dead easy to find things that have gone wrong. I mean, I always say to people, a bad photo is a free lesson. Just instead of just going, nah, delete it, why? Why didn't it work? How could you have changed it? Look for the good things in it, exactly like you say. So, I mean, you're very highly trained to look for the details in photos now, and we continue to be trained more and more by Terry at these societies, because, let's face it, a judge's training is never done. But, I mean, what type of judge would you say that you are? What type of things do you tend to pick up on naturally? And is there anything you think you might risk missing?
I don't know. You'd have to probably ask Terry for a description of what type of judge I am. I think I would be. I see myself as more of a technical judge. I would look more for, and I notice very easily things like cloning repetition, visual patterns. Probably my strongest point. And so, if there is a repeating pattern somewhere in what I'm looking at, I'm going to find it really, really fast. So things like cloning repetition, focal plane breaks, things that are actually retouching issues, but visually are there, where most people would miss them. I'm usually that one that would, unfortunately, hone in on them and know that they exist. And then when you see one, you see all of them, so probably that, masking issues. I'm a very big stickler for the absolute basics in an image, which is that, if it's a portrait, the eyes should be sharp. I don't really care about anything else at that point in terms of focal plane depth or anything like that, but the eyes should be the sharpest point of the image. So if it's the nose, you're not going to probably get a good result from me, because the sharpest point should be the point you want the viewer to look at, which is almost exclusively the eyes, unless obviously it's not a one-size-fits-all rule, but those things.
Someone might have a thing for noses, I suppose, but
yeah, well, it could be an image that prioritizes, that's focused on that. But in that case, I would recommend not having the eyes visible at all, because then you're not creating a draw for a connection. So there's the technical bits for me. I'd probably be more likely to miss, not necessarily miss, but to prioritize less the integral meaning behind an image. So there are judges that judge very, very well, but far more emotionally. So they rely on the emotional connection, the narrative portrayed through the image, and they would discount some technical flaws because that meaning hits them so hard. And I would, 3 years ago, I'd have said I'm definitely not an emotional judge, and I will only look really at the technical. But I think that, and again, Terry definitely could probably agree with this, that over time, that's been proven wrong, because there are certain images that will grab me, and then I'm in, and I will battle it out to the end of the earth to make sure that print gets the score that I feel it deserves, because it struck a chord and hit an emotional feeling. And it could be something as simple as one of the test prints, which is a bride in a car. It's a wedding image, nothing to do with my genre, and it was a bride in a car with some of the people around, and the other people around the car looked really happy, and she just had this expression on her face of it was, I don't know whether it was a cross between sort of fear and disappointment, I don't know, but her face didn't say what the rest of the image was saying, and it hit me so hard I got emotional about it.
Right.
And I was like, who am I at this stage? Because I'm not very emotional person normally, but there are these certain images I'm like, do you know what, maybe I am an emotional. It just has to be the right story, I think, and then I'm here for it. But primarily a technical judge.
Yeah, I sympathise with you in many ways there. I mean, certainly a lot of people like adding blur to images later on to sort of bring the subject out more. And there's nothing really that jumps out at me sooner than that little bit of grass that's sort of 6 foot behind another bit that's totally blurred. And you're thinking, why is this sharp? Suddenly a bit of random piece of grass or a random flower in the middle of this field or woodland that's sharp, and everything else around it's blurry. And I don't know, I just find it very hard not to latch on to some of those sort of things. How's it affected how you see your own images then? Do you find you become less satisfied in any way by what you're producing? How does being a judge affect how you see your own work?
I actually think it's helped to make me less bothered about how things do in competition, because it's a strange process. But when the more you see, I have images that I love and I adore, but I just never put them in a competition because I know they won't do very well. But that doesn't mean they're bad pictures. It just means that they probably wouldn't be well received by a specific organization or by a specific competition. And there are many out there that offer different things and different types of work. So like recent images, I've got a couple that I might put in just for fun. Sometimes I put pictures in to test the judges, just to see kind of like how are they going to react to that thing, which I think is quite interesting. And I do have sometimes quite a lot of fun with that. Just because
you're not putting ones in with cloning issues in there to see if they spot them.
Oh no!
Oh good.
My technical brain will not ever let anything pass out of my door with a technical issue. So
I know the feeling.
I can't. That will never happen. No. But there are certain styles of work or certain images where I know this is going to be way too busy to do well in a specific competition, where we know that judges tend to like very clean scenes, and so I either won't put it in or I just will, but I won't be as hung up on the result of that. But it's very difficult to explain for people who aren't there. I think one thing that it has done through judging, because I've judged for years for different organisations, and the Society's print competition this year was the first time I've judged that print comp, but I've judged other competitions before, and I think the biggest thing that I can say to anybody who is submitted for competition is that I understand, because I can remember what it was like entering my own best work and not understanding the result when it didn't go my way. But having judged, it's impossible to explain in a few words how many pictures we see. We see thousands and thousands and thousands of images. In some cases, in one competition, I'll judge over 2,000 pictures myself. So when you've seen that many images, the scoring criteria makes more sense, because usually what we're looking for a higher score is originality, or uniqueness is sometimes the word that's in use. And goodness gracious me, when you've been judging 25,000, 50,000 images or you look at that many images, especially in one genre. So I judge pet photography awards fairly frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And so for those, I'm looking at thousands of images of dogs, usually hundreds and hundreds in portrait category alone. And so when you think about how many pictures I see, to get something that I would classify as original or unique has to be so special. That's not going to be somebody's normal client work.
No.
So it's that was the biggest thing for me, where I was like, we need to be looking for something totally unique, creative, and original if I want to create it myself and hit that level in that organization. So again, that's the second thing, is that understanding of what the judges are going to be seeing with the competitions that they judge. And that's very, very different for a general print comp than it is for a niche specific competition. So it's not that the standard has to be any higher, that there's almost a prioritization on different things there. But if it's, a pet photography competition, we're going to be looking for something unique. And that bar for unique is very different than what you may have seen, Joe. So I could submit one of my normal client images to you that's a bit different from what you would normally see. And you think, wow, this is so creative, so unique. But that same picture, if I go and put that in a pet photography specific competition, is going to be replicated 30 times in the same category. So then it's no longer unique. And so that's the tricky part to help people understand. And that's the part that I think I've understood a lot more. The more I judge is actually that bar is very high. And it gets considerably higher every year as well.
Yeah. And it gets very difficult when you've got mixed categories as well. So open categories, for example, that kind of thing. And it is a fact that some things will connect with the emotional people very quickly. So it can be a lot easier seemingly in some of these categories to score better with certain types of images. I mean, not many people are going to get excited about a bottle, but unless it's being offered to them in a pub, if it's, it can depend on the genre sometimes as to how easily people relate to it. So as a product photographer, you're right. Me seeing your photography, it might be harder for me to judge what is more unusual, what is a little bit further out of the box, because I haven't seen quite as many. But then similarly, sometimes people look at product photos and they don't really know what to make of it. And I'm just sort of my brain's just analysing it left, right and centre going, but hang on, that bit's great, that bit's fantastic. Have you seen how they've done that? No. Hey, what? So... you've gone through both sides of this. You've been judging, but you've also won an awful lot of awards. Now, does this sort of success, does this sort of reaching this point within the industry, does that help you to be more relaxed, more confident, or do you find actually it weighs on you heavy? Is it a sense of pressure that you've got to maintain this standard? How does it feel to you?
A bit of both. A bit of both for sure. It's there is a large amount of pressure on me to consistently be at the top of our game, which did paralyze me for about a year. And now I give it less focus because it still exists and it will still be the truth. The reason why I went and did the awards in the first place and the first fellowship I did as well was to give some more credibility. And so there's that level of credibility that comes from consistently winning across different organizations. And that's the important thing. So it was never all within one. And that was a big focus for me of making sure that my work was truly at that standard, because it wasn't just one set of judges that felt it was. It was actually a wide variety of different judges in different organizations that felt that way. Hence why I put, and especially in the past, a large focus on multiple different organizations. Now less so. I think I feel very content with who I am and what I'm doing now, because I genuinely don't think that I could be doing what I'm doing right now any better without sacrificing something that I care about. So that grounds me, because yes, I could be going and shooting every single day in epic locations, but I also then would not be able to have and look after the horses, which matter a lot to me, and the farm project would go behind, and I wouldn't be able to help my students as much. So every single decision that we make anyway is a trade-off in some way, shape or form for time, enjoyment, money, whatever it is. And I think you have to get to a point where you're happy with your lot because you can't do it all. And that took a long time for me to be okay with, because I'd much rather be able to do everything all the time. So so for me, I try and let that pressure lessen, because I know I can't do what is necessary to be achieving higher than I have done repeatedly without sacrificing something that matters to me. So I'm okay with it because of that mental dance that I play with myself. The other side of it is that there is I don't know, a level of satisfaction with what I have achieved already, because all of it was achieved in a very short space of time, literally speaking. So my first competition win was late 2020. So I think it was October, November. That was the first ever win that I'd ever had. And that was International Pet Photographer of the Year. And that was fine. That was good. That was overwhelmingly fantastic. It's now 2025. And technically, I'm not 100% sure when this recording is going to go out, but the last known competition win was in January at the Societies with the Digital Pet Photographer of the Year. So that was the last one. In that gap, if we just look at Photographer of the Year titles, not Image of the Year or similar, I think I've got 16 titles in that
pretty
period
good
of
going,
time.
isn't it?
So I'm quite content with that. I stopped publicizing them as well very quickly. I think in mid 2021 or 2022, I stopped sharing them because it felt like I was boasting or bragging, and it got a bit boring, to be honest. So I just didn't want to be that person, because it can be a bit annoying. So I stopped publicizing them. So really, I just do them for me now rather than anything else. Sometimes I'll share a thing like, oh, how fantastic was this? But it's far less of a focus of my time. And I just do them for fun, and also to push myself, and also to push the judges a little bit. So like I said, I will enter things that they perhaps wouldn't normally see. And just as a test to see either A, how they're going to land in that kind of a competition, how that thing's going to do, or how can this create a conversation between the judges that might help and better our niche and its results in competition. So I don't know the answer to that, because I'm not there most of the time, unless it's print comp for judging. But it's very interesting that some images that are incredibly technically complex, incredibly difficult to retouch well, still very clean, because I wouldn't ever let anything go through that wasn't clean. How badly they do in competition, when realistically they are far more difficult to capture, and also far more what our clients love as well, than what does do well in those competitions. And that's very interesting for me to see. And that's also another reason why I'm like, do you know what, it's okay that I like this, even if the other judges maybe didn't like it so much, because I also know my clients would pay a lot of money to have that of their subject on a wall. And so you have to remember, you know, what are we doing this for? I'll always love competition. It will always be a massive thing for me. I just really enjoy it. I love it. I'm here for it. I like the pressure. I like the stress. I like the pain. I like the joy. I like all parts of it. I think are really good, and I think it's been very good for me as a person as well, to build up resilience and to understand other people's point of view a bit more, and those things. So I will always love it, but I also am very, very, very good at being aware that it's not the be all and end all, and it doesn't define me as a person depending on my success.
It sounds like you've got a pretty sort of healthy overall perspective for it there. And, you know, noticing coming through again there, as with other areas in your career, you seem to like to give back. You know, you want to do things that are going to help maintain the industry, help to move things on a bit. So talking about images there that might stretch the judges. But I mean, there are other areas that you're known for taking on challenges that others would shy away from. So like discussing aspects of mental health on stage or on podcasts and so on. It's okay, it's becoming slightly more common, but it's still not an easy thing to do. And I wonder, how do you cope with the kind of the weight of other people's stories, their responses to it? Because if you're one of the few that opens that door, then there's often a flood that then follow. So how does it affect you? How do you then deal with all that sort of heavy stuff that you're getting shared back with you?
I think you have to. I think you need to be in a pretty good place yourself before you open that door, because otherwise you would drown in it. And that's really important to remember. It's something that I'm very open about. I don't think that it should necessarily be a taboo. I also don't think that it should be a reason why somebody does or doesn't do something, which means that I do go a little bit against the grain on that. So in terms of being in a negative mental headspace, if you're in the very deepest, darkest parts of depression, then you need to seek professional help for that. And that's something that I would and have helped people to find. If it's a case where you're like, you know what, just I struggle with my attention or whatever, whether it's diagnosed or not, that shouldn't, in my opinion, be left to be a reason why you do or don't do something. So it's when it becomes used as an excuse that I will usually have a firm conversation with the person in question and say, hey, no, because no one's going to change this other than you. So it can't be it can be a limiting factor, and it's something that you would have to work very, very hard around, or put support systems in place to get around. That's the truth. But it shouldn't be a reason why you say you can't do something unless physically you literally can't do that thing, which is fine. Yeah. Like, I'll never be able to do mental arithmetic well. I know that. I'm okay with it. Yeah. That's a very light example of the same thing. I also know that I'm not going to be able to do mountain workshops up mountains because physically my legs aren't able to do that. So there is a level of like, well, I can't work around that. It could potentially, get a helicopter to the top of the mountain, but there are ways around things, but that's a bit extreme.
That might be a bit indulgent.
Yeah. Whereas, let's look at a different example, Let's say that somebody has social anxiety, because I feel like we've been there. So somebody has crippling social anxiety and therefore is unable to work around people in person. And they also have this desire and this goal that they definitely want to do. So it's not a case of like, oh, well, I just won't do that thing. It's I really want to do this thing, but I can't because of XYZ. So they really want to run a photography business that works at events. You've got two polar opposites there and the very big mountain to climb. But if you want it badly enough and have the resources to be able to do so, there is always a will. Where there's a will, there's a way. It's just going to be very hard. So my first instance in those kinds of situations is to look, is there an alternative other than the event photography that might be better suited to the things that you find difficult as a person? That would be like my first port of call. But some people, they are so like, no, we're doing this thing. I really want to do it. I really am struggling with this thing. And then, okay, right, what do we need to do to get from A to B? This is essentially goal setting, but on a monumental scale where you have to rewire your brain in the process. And that involves professional help anyway. So there is always going to be an element of professional help, self-help, and then like breaking things down into baby steps until they become doable. And I'm only saying this as a story because it's happened, and someone has done this, and it took them about 3 years to be able to do their first event, but they did it, and it was only because they wanted it so badly that they genuinely did move heaven and earth to be able to get to the point where they did that. And it did take a lot of resource, a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of pain, a lot of struggling, but they were able to get from that A to B place. And so I'm a big believer of that when it comes to things to do with mental health and also self-help. I think a lot of the time we can look at things, we can get given a label and we live in that and we sit in it. And we're like, well, we can't do that. We can't do this one thing because maybe we're autistic, for example. And so we'll never be able to do that. And I think that's a very self-limiting thing because of the label. And a lot of the time, if you break it down into things you are able to do and things that you could maybe chip away at now and again, you can stretch your limitation to include what you wanted to do in the first place. And for avoidance of doubt, I'm saying that specific label because it's attributable to me. So I'm not labeling things that I can't understand myself. So just to clarify that for anybody who's listening who might think, wow, she's coming for me on this one. No, I'm coming for myself on this one.
No, well, I'm me too. So I'm autistic, and but the other thing is people often with those kind of labels, and then they might see a very public figure or see a figure in a movie that is a certain way and think, well, if I've been labelled with that, therefore I can't do what that person would do. And you think, we're all different.
Exactly.
It's like saying if you've met a French person, all other French people are the same. They're not. They share traits and things. I mean, autistic people share certain typicality, certain traits, but it's not like we're all identical. It's like this sort of silly labels that they have about high functioning and low functioning. It all depends on the situation. It all depends on what the individual copes well with, what energizes them, or what they find really hard. So, you can be very high functioning in a certain situation compared to somebody else, but put them in another one and not so much.
Yeah, I think in a way, though, our brains can help us. And I think that's important. That is, in a way, an unfair advantage. And I will staunchly be behind this. So I know that's going to ruffle some feathers. But I do think we do, in a way, have a little bit of an unfair advantage in that the way our brains work is slightly different. And for me, that manifests as a very, very, very solid ability to turn off an emotional reaction to something and come at it with a very practical reaction. And that is also pivotal in me being able to do the things that I do, and being able to generally just, my dad taught me at a very young age to just put it in a box, and it meant put a situation that is causing you overwhelm in a box in your head and leave it there until an appropriate time where you can open it up and deal with it. And it's a very unhealthy method realistically, because it means that I have these boxes that will eventually be opened either by me or by another trigger, but it does also mean that I'm able to function, to use that word, at a very high level without letting things that are particularly difficult or emotional get too involved in that. And that does mean that in times of extreme stress, I can usually put it away and deal with the bit that needs to happen and prioritize effectively. And I think that is something that is an unfair advantage in a way, in the way that our brains work. But we have many disadvantages that are very like the social. Oh goodness me, put me in a group and it's just a disaster. One-on-one, I'm okay. I'm better at that, but.
Why do you think I do podcasts? So I can talk to one person at a time, go to conventions and photography shows, and there's crowds of people around. There's so much noise. My ears just pick up on this mush of noise. Trying to listen to one person within that context of everything else going on is so incredibly draining. You can't believe it. It really is.
But you've then started a podcast because that works to your strengths.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and then that's the thing. So again, we're coming back down to that understanding of our strengths and weaknesses. And for me, social situations in a group, I don't know what to do. I can't rehearse anything well enough to deal with that. I'm much better than I was as a child and a teenager. That was bad. No one wants to witness anything that happened then. So I'm much better now, and I'm fairly good at reading people. I find the biggest issues that I have are when I felt like I read a situation as something and genuinely was happy with how my understanding of that went. And this is only fairly recently, and I realized how badly it affected me, was then somebody else said how they saw the same situation and it was so different to how I'd read it, and I was mortified because that wasn't what I'd got from this whole situation that had unfolded. And it really knocked my confidence, and I didn't realize how much that would have affected me as it did. So again, still social situations I will shy away from, whereas I can speak on a stage in front of loads of people because I'm speaking about my area of knowledge, and I can work with workshop groups that are very large and very chaotic because I'm speaking about my section of knowledge. So if I feel like I am able and I understand that thing 100%, then I feel like I can talk about it very well in a group and be absolutely fine. And I don't have any fear or nervousness or anything involved in that. Weirdly, I'm very just like, yep, I can do that thing. That's fine. But if you ask me to sit at a large dinner table and have a conversation,
No.
not going to be something that I'm going to be sweating. That's going to be when we're really nervous and I don't do well with that. So everybody, again, has those strengths. And as long as you are able to know them, and I think it's a very good exercise to try and know them. So for anybody who's listening, who's thinking like, what are these two talking about? They're all weird. We are. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But what you could do is write down some things that you feel like you're good at. And even if that's, so for me, having done this, I remember doing this years ago. If I was going to be doing that, I wouldn't be specifically focusing on skills. It would be on things. So like actions or activities. So I'm good at reading. For example.
I would go beyond all that as well and think about character traits, because I'm at the moment that we're recording, I'm partway through training to be qualified as a strengths practitioner. So I'm studying positive psychology and I'm studying coaching. And one of the things that I've found is very helpful, especially for people who are used to people approaching them from a negative perspective of you can't do this or you're awkward in that situation or whatever, is that strengths is starting from a positive place and building on that and moving forward. So it gives you that a different approach, and it's brilliant for everybody. Not whether you're neurodivergent or whatever, it's brilliant for everybody if you can build on your strengths. There's scientific research that proves that you improve more quickly that way than you do picking the things that you're weak at and trying to bring it all up to the same kind of level. So when you're looking at your strengths, I would say you don't necessarily fall into the trap of just thinking about business, or because you'll find strengths in other areas of your life that can then actually impact your business as well. They might not obviously be business strengths, but they're part of who you are. And if you can bring who you are to your business, then that's part of what's going to make you unique without you having to go and find a USP.
Yeah, exactly. I'm known as a very good problem solver, and usually in a fairly crisis level situation. And that has always been a thing. So if somebody ever was in like a really major problem, for some reason, I was the first port of call, and therefore, and they would come knowing that they were not going to get a sympathetic emotional response, because I've learned how to do a bit of that, but it's not my normal go-to. Whereas they would get a practical, let's sort out this situation, let's make sure that we can get this back on track, let's bring everything back together, this is what we're doing, XYZ, and I would like drive it through till the end. And so that, although seems a bit weird and a bit extreme, does mean that when I'm in my business situations, it's incredibly helpful to be able to problem solve very effectively, very efficiently, and without emotion. And those things do help from a business perspective, and also in other people's businesses. So I also was somebody who, just due to situations around my upbringing, always catastrophized. But in a fairly positive way, if there was a positive way of catastrophizing. So
a positive catastrophe.
Yeah, well, no.
Damn, everything's all going to go well.
Yes, the catastrophe was always bad. No, so we would, I would have situations where, in any given situation, I would imagine all the ways it could go wrong. So either for my relative safety, my physical safety, or my emotional safety, there was always a reading of a situation. It could be somebody's expression, it could be things that were said, it could be hypothetical things that might happen in the future. But there was what are all the things that could go wrong, which meant that when I was thrust into a business situation of helping other business owners, actually I was the most useful person on their entire, they would bring me in, directors would bring me into board meetings when I was 19 to tell them all the things that could go wrong with what they were planning to do. And then my job was to write reports for them on that, and also to fix problems that could come up, or to highlight them so that they could be fixed. And so that very negative trait of always seeing the negative in something and how it could all go wrong actually was my biggest strength when it came to helping other people. And I do that now. So usually if something goes wrong, Not always. We've got an example this last week. But usually if something goes wrong, I have at least thought about a plan for how we could fix it. So again, I can act from a place of no emotion in that because it's already been thought through. And it can be quite a negative way of being. I can also see the positive bits that could happen, but far more often than not, it's negative. But it means that I'm able to add resilience to our businesses and processes because we've already gone through all the negative things.
Well, you're also not sugarcoating and bouncing around in business like you so often see. People minimise problems because they don't want people to feel bad, or they want to work their way up the ladder, so they don't want to upset people. And, you know, I'm one who's just not interested in all of that. So I actually have to be quite careful that I'm not too frank, that it actually upsets somebody or something like that. But it's just, I don't have a natural tendency to want to sugarcoat things. It's just, well, there's a problem, there's a solution, off we go, sort of thing. It's a lot more kind of interested in the logic of it rather than the emotional and social implications. And similarly, you can make the most out of someone like me by the fact that I sit and read sort of graduate, postgraduate textbooks the way somebody else might work their way through a Harry Potter, So it's for me, it's fun. I know that seems odd, but
you're speaking to the choir, sadly, Joe. So I mean, my bank of psychology and anatomy textbooks upstairs would argue the same thing. So unfortunately, I think
Excellent.
We're too alike to have a genuine kind of an impartial discussion or something like this. But no, it is very good, I think, to be able to switch off the emotional side. But I have always tried to keep a bit of it in, and that there are times where most of the decisions that I make are around, especially if they could impact somebody else, are around how would that make that person feel. So there's always that level of, I will always try and come back to the human element of how would that, so in judging, that comes across in how I'm framing my critique. So if the print is pretty much a disaster, and we've all had those in terms of we've all created an image, and I have sent in a print that should never have gone in the print, like it was a disaster. So if I get a print come through, there's so much that could be improved in that, I will always be thinking in my head, for if I'm giving a feedback or a critique on it, of what can I say that will generate change. So I don't want to be saying this is great or this is perfect if it's not. So what can I say that can generate change, but in a way that the author will take positively and drive them to create that change or action that's needed. And a lot of the time that changes how you say what you say next, from judging. And it's the easiest example of it is when you're judging, because the work that you see is the author's best, otherwise they wouldn't have put it in. So it's remembering that fact. There's some people who put in a joke print, but by and large this is that person's best work, and we've all been there, and I think people sometimes forget that. So we've all been there at that stage or at that level, or wherever it is. And so what I'd never want to do is make the entrant feel like they can never enter again because they're bad. No, and it's not about that. Exactly. So there's a level of how can I say what I need to say in a way that will encourage rather than discourage. And a lot of that is, how would that make me feel if it was me? Because I still am very heavily impacted by other people's words and actions. I still am, and I don't think I'll ever get away from that, which is why I'm absolutely useless as a blooming, quote unquote influencer, because I'll never be able to separate the troll comments from real people. And, I just can't do it. And I know that, that's a weakness that I have. So I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of how language choices can change how somebody can take or feel about something. And I will try to move heaven and earth, again, same phrase I've used before already on this, to not make somebody feel less than because of something that needed to be said. That doesn't mean the thing's not said. It's still said. It's exactly. Just delivered carefully. And I think that's really important as well, and to understand that although me and you have been talking about basically being non-emotional, having no emotion people, and being able to make decisions and say things from a place of logic. That doesn't mean that it's okay to remove human emotion from it entirely, and we both would be in agreement of that.
Well, we're not robots. We're not robots. It's not sort of like suddenly you're a computer and everything is purely logic. I'm deeply emotional. I just don't necessarily always show it, especially not in ways that people are used to seeing it, I suppose, unless it really is bubbled over to the point where it's just I have a meltdown.
Yes.
But, I think a lot of the time people might just sort of see you and think, is he happy? Is he okay? Is he, whatever? And it's like when people sometimes ask me how I am or something, is part of me just gives the socially acceptable answers, because the honest answer is I don't always know.
I was just going to say, I was just going to say the same thing. You asked, and I'm like, I actually don't know. I'm going to need at least 7 business days to work that out.
It's for those who like long words, alexithymia. It's an issue with identifying and understanding the emotions that you're feeling, and that can be a problem sometimes. But I think the important thing is that whilst at times people might think, oh, you're not reacting as I might have expected, it's not that there's no emotion there. It's just that it's being processed differently and responded to perhaps slower or perhaps differently to how other people might. So I think sometimes autistic people have this false impression, although not to say that none of us are rude, but can have this impression. People think you're a bit, they're a bit spiky or a bit difficult or something, and you think, well,
spiky is prickly. I get when I was in school. Excuse my French, but a lot of people met me because we moved schools a bit as kids, and a lot of people met me, and then about 3 to 6 months later, multiple people said the same phrase. It's really strange though, Jess, because when we first met, I really thought you were. And it was repeated multiple times. And I was like, I don't understand why that's the case, because I never felt that I was problematic. But obviously, it was a repetitive thing that happened over and over again. So yeah, prickly, I get quite a lot as well. But sometimes also, if I'm in a crisis management situation, which I have been recently in the last couple of weeks, a lot of the time then if somebody is expecting a sympathetic or emotional reaction from me by saying something, they will not get it, because mentally I don't have the bandwidth to be able to switch from one to the other well. So there can be a case where something's gone wrong, but it's integral to, or the impact of that will sacrifice something that's also very important, which has happened recently. And I noticed afterwards, looking back on the week that happened or the day that happened, that actually I should have reacted differently from a social perspective. I should have said, oh, I hope you're okay, or I should have been more visibly upset, or to be socially more normal. But at that point, it wasn't about that. It was about making sure that the crisis was managed and the problem was solved. And so it can come across as very insensitive, I think, sometimes, but I'm trying to allocate mental resource to what needs my mental resource the most. And in a crisis management situation, it is the crisis, unfortunately, rather than being a supportive human being. So, it's an interesting thing. But then that's a reflection again, Joe, So there's a lot of self-reflection, a lot of introspection, a lot of also, self-critique. And I can criticize myself and say, I dealt with that like an absolute disaster and I should have done X, Y, and Z. But I can also look at situations and say, do you know what? I handled that well. And I was talking with somebody recently, some people who we work with as a team. So we're on like peer-to-peer level. And they were saying how they would prefer, ways of working moving forwards, and that they do appreciate positive feedback whilst they're working. And how would I approach that? And I said, honestly, positive feedback's probably not going to land that well. Like I take it or leave it. I don't necessarily need it. And then I thought a little more about it, and I said, you know what? The one thing that I would really appreciate is sort of phrases more along the lines of, how am I handling something? So you handled that really well, or that process worked effectively. Those things are actually more important to me than you're doing a good job. That you're doing a good job means nothing to me. I'd like to know, how am I handling this situation? And so that's interesting as well. And again, introspection. All of this is, How do I work and how can I work better? And that's where it boils down to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're doing a really good job so far on this podcast.
Oh, thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate that. I mean, I think there's been a few wibbly wobbly moments, but we'll dissect it all after.
I'm just trying to work out how I can not upset your feelings by saying we're going to have to come to an end fairly soon.
That's such a shame, because we could have had this conversation for about a year, I think.
If people want to find out more about strengths, then please do get in touch, because that is something I'm very interested in helping people with. If you want someone just to pat you on the head and say you're doing very well, maybe not the best person, but it's something which I love, is helping people talk about their strengths and develop them. So please do get in touch with me if you want to do so on that. And if you want to, if for some bizarre reason you're not familiar with Jess's work, what's wrong with you? Then Jess, where would you send them to? Where's the best place to find out more?
Honestly, after this podcast, I'm not sure anyone's going to want to know anything about me. But no, in all fairness, I am very much kind of like, what you see is what you get. So this is how I am with students. This is how I am inside our membership platform as well, and this is how I am on courses too. So it's a very kind of like, no, say it how it is, because I don't know another way of doing that. So it's just very, very much frank. And I think actually a lot of people really appreciate that from especially a business perspective, but also just guiding hand when it comes to the photography. So the best place to find me is at thattogspot.com. I'm sure there'll be some links handy around here, or just on Instagram as well, That Tog Spot, just a very simple handle. We have a membership platform, like I've mentioned, a really great community of like-minded people. It's not positive only, because we're not that strict on it, but we do not let disruptive people stick around. So it's a very safe place to be. It's very open, very honest. People share things that they would never share elsewhere, and a really, really great community. So that's our membership on what we call the Vault, in the Vault, which has a lot of resources in it as well, primarily around dog photography, with some equine, some feline, some people, but it's primarily pet photography focused. It's probably the best place to find me.
Excellent. Yeah. And there's plenty of fantastic images to see on your Instagram, on your websites. And if you aren't familiar with Jess's work, then please do go and have a look, and hopefully you will be inspired. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed chatting, and we've covered quite a bit of ground.
I think so. I mean, I'm hoping that people will know, if they listen to this, that we come from a place of love. So, although a lot of the things that I say regularly can be taken as quite controversial, genuinely, I do mean the best. It's all with the best of intentions. Sometimes things are sometimes very, very blunt. I guess.
Yeah, we can both be that way. We both care, and sometimes when you care, you say things bluntly. Well, let's have a nice blunt ending to the podcast.
Of course. Nice speaking to you.
Yeah, thank you all for listening. This has been the Focus Professional Podcast.